Hi. So, one of the points that gets glossed over a lot in making amigurumi is how you actually finish these toys once you've finished crocheting them. And I think this is a stumbling block for a lot of people because it's very, very important for the quality of your finished item, but it can be kind of tricky. So I was going to show you how I usually put my toys together, and there are a couple of different techniques that other people use. But this is the one that works pretty well for me. First off, materials. I use just a basic polyester thread, sewing thread. Some people use yarn. I find that thread gives me a little more detail. You can use whatever works best for you. But basically what I use is a mattress stitch, also called like a ladder stitch. You'll see it in finishing maybe like knit sweaters or putting a binding on quilts. I'll put a link up for some extra tutorials on how to do a ladder or mattress stitch. But the benefit of using this kind of stitch, if you haven't used it before, is that it is almost entirely invisible. So basically, I have a basic head and basic body from Creepy Cute Crochet, and I'm just going to stitch the head onto the body. And what I do, try to get this in as close as possible without having my hands in the way. You're going to snag the edge of the head and the edge of the body. And you're just going to keep doing that. And the stitch placement, there's not really one good rule for how to do this. You're going to have to kind of just look at it and decide what's going to look best for your particular project and particular piece. And as you go, you just pull the seam tight. And as you can see, the loose stitches, when you pull them tight, will just sort of gather the material together and hide all of your stitches, which is another benefit to the mattress stitch, is you can really get away with almost any color thread because it's going to be hidden pretty well by the yarn. I usually only keep black and white thread on hand because for most projects that's all I need, because the thread shouldn't show up anyway. So yeah, and as you go, look at how it's fitting together. Make sure you don't need to start taking up a little more on the top or the bottom, because you don't want your head to sort of be rotating around or sort of stuck, bunched up on one side of the body. And some of this just takes practice to make sure that you don't lose all your stuffing or your pellets or whatever you're using as you stitch things together. Going back a little bit, I know some people suggest that using yarn is preferable to using thread because over time the thread will cut through the yarn and cause it to break. I haven't really had any trouble with this. If you're making a project you expect to, say, machine wash frequently, or you're making something that you want to last for generations upon generations, you might consider using yarn. But for smaller projects, I think that yarn is kind of tricky to get really good, crisp detail work. And you'll definitely want a sharp needle. Don't use a tapestry needle for this. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time getting in between. I'm not actually just going around the stitches. Some people, especially if you're using yarn again, you might use a tapestry needle and just go basically in between the stitches or in between the yarn. I'm actually stitching just straight through the fabric. And again, that's because that gives me a little more detail. I can place the stitches wherever I want, as opposed to making sure that I only go through basically where the edges of the stitches are. Now I'm pretty much all the way around. I'm going to go back and forth a little bit to make sure that the yarn is secured, so I don't have the seam loosen up over time. Should be sufficient. Now I'll just get my scissors and there we go.